True crime horror. The disturbing disappearance of the Sodder children. It was Christmas Eve, 1945, one of the most unsettling nights in American history. The air was crisp in Fayetteville, West Virginia, as the Sodder family gathered together to celebrate the holiday. But what began as a joyful evening would soon unravel into one of the darkest mysteries of the 20th century. The fire that consumed their home on that cold December night didn't just claim their house, it claimed their children, and left behind questions that still haunt us today. The night of the fire. Around 1 a.m., the house of George and Jenny Sodder erupted into flames. The fire, which seemed to have started in the basement, spread quickly, and within moments, the family's home was engulfed. George and Jenny, along with 4 of their children, managed to escape through the windows, narrowly avoiding death. But there were 5 children still inside: Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty. As the fire raged on, the parents screamed for their children to escape, but there was no sign of them. The fire department arrived, but when they searched through the rubble, something was amiss. No bodies were found, not a single trace of the 5 children, no charred remains, no bones. The fire had consumed everything, but not the children. The bizarre details. A fire of such intensity typically leaves behind some remnants of human remains. But in this case, the absence of evidence was chilling. The fire was hot enough to destroy their home, but could it have destroyed every last trace of the children? It didn't seem possible. To make matters stranger, the family's ladder, which could have allowed the children to escape, was missing. Had someone taken it during the fire? How could the children have been trapped inside without it? And then there were the strange events leading up to the fire. Earlier that evening, a phone call had come through to the house. The caller, a woman, asked for the children by name, but when they answered, the woman hung up quickly. The phone call seemed like a harmless mistake at the time, but in hindsight, it now seemed like a disturbing distraction, keeping the children from escaping or alerting their parents. The investigation. As the days passed, the investigation into the fire and the children's disappearance seemed to be filled with more questions than answers. Fire experts found that the blaze should not have been hot enough to have incinerated human bodies completely, especially when other belongings in the house were relatively undamaged. And yet, there were no remains. One of the most baffling pieces of evidence was the absence of bones. Experts later confirmed that under normal conditions, bones do not disintegrate completely in a house fire. This led to speculation that the children might have been taken before the fire ever reached them. A stranger's letter. The mystery deepened over the years. In 1952, several years after the fire, the Sodder family received an anonymous letter. It was a photograph of a young man, about the age their missing son, Louis, would have been. The boy in the photograph closely resembled Louis, and the letter claimed that he was alive and living in a nearby town. The family was shocked, but despite their efforts to track down the lead, they found nothing. Was this a hoax? Or had their son somehow escaped the fire and been taken to a distant place? The letter only deepened the mystery, leaving the Sodders with more questions than answers. Theories and suspicions. Could this have been foul play? Was the fire set deliberately? Many people in the town of Fayetteville thought so. George Sodder had made a few enemies over the years. He was a businessman who had spoken out against corrupt local politicians, and some speculated that his enemies were behind the fire. Using it to exact revenge on him and his family. Had they kidnapped the children to make sure George never found out the truth? Some believed the fire was part of a larger cover-up, possibly involving organized crime. After all, George's business dealings may have made him a target. But how could anyone explain the lack of remains? The paranoia builds. Over the years, the Sodders never gave up hope. They refused to believe that their children had died in the fire. They kept searching, following leads wherever they could find them. In the meantime, they put up a billboard on Route 16 with the faces of their 5 missing children and a reward for anyone who had information. They never stopped believing their children were alive. The family's obsession with the case grew, but so did the mystery. Every year, new theories surfaced, but no one ever came close to an answer. In the following decades, sightings of the children were reported all over the country. Some claimed to have seen them in nearby states, and others swore that they had recognized them from the billboard. But all of these leads turned out to be dead ends. A ghostly presence. Years passed, and the fire and the children's disappearance seemed to fade into the background of history. But some strange things kept happening at the site of the original house. Those who lived near the site reported hearing unexplained noises in the night, like children's laughter or footsteps. Others claimed to see shadowy figures moving around the ruins of the old house, despite it being long destroyed. Could it be that the Sodder children were still out there, trapped in some kind of supernatural limbo? Was their disappearance part of something larger, something beyond the understanding of the living? Could the children have been taken, not by people, but by something far darker? A lingering question. Today, decades after the fire, the Sodder family's case remains unsolved. There are still no answers, no bodies, no clear explanation of what happened to the children, no evidence to close the case. The paranormal theories persist, with some believing the children were taken by supernatural forces. Others insist it was a well-orchestrated kidnapping. But one thing is clear: the mystery of the Sodder children has never been solved, and it continues to haunt the small town of Fayetteville to this day. The Sodder family's story is a chilling reminder that some mysteries, no matter how much we try to uncover them, will never reveal their answers. And as long as the fire continues to haunt the people of Fayetteville, so too will the missing children who, perhaps, are still out there, waiting for us to finally understand what truly happened that fateful Christmas Eve.